Hello, everyone. So this week I am asking myself, how can I make these official declarations and the revelations relevant to us in our day? I've listened to a lot of the history, and I do enjoy the history, and there's some wonderful insights there. However, as you know, and I begin many, many times with this principle coming from that Boyd K. Packer quote that my variation, though, right? True doctrine, faith in true doctrine changes our behavior better than a study of behavior changes behavior. And so I'm looking at how to make this relevant to us today. And, a lot of the feeling that comes from this is this apologetic feeling. And I get it. I don't want to be critical of that. And I share in that apologetic feeling. We look at some of the problems of the past, the mistakes and sins. And for me, again, if you've listened to me before, you know that I emphasize the word sin over mistake because sin can be forgiven. We need to remember that. It's not just the mistakes, but sin can be forgiven, and so the sins of the past and how we reconcile with that. From a psychological perspective, we're going to get into this again, into the nitty gritty, when we get into the story of Noah in the Old Testament. There's an interesting story about seeing the nakedness of the father. So since I've already brought that up, there's this idea of immaturity where, in order to be fully mature, man must often reconcile with their parents, and this generally is necessary in a maturation step because you kind of go through this phase, maybe in that, I mean, you have the brazen independence of the teenager, and then kind of a arrogant, narcissistic, messianic phase in the 18 to 25, where it's like, I know better than everyone, I'm going to solve all the world's problems, why don't we just fix this? And there's this, it's a beautiful naivety, in my opinion, that's intermingled with that, because I love the faith and energy that comes from that. However, because it's lacking in experience, because they really haven't fully had their eyes open to what it means to be a fallen man, there's something lacking in that. For me, when I go through the Book of Mormon and you get the story of Nephi, we often quote the energetic verse that I will go and do the things which the Lord hath commanded. Now, of course, the story could go multiple ways. With Nephi, we know that that faith is validated, but it's easy to make that statement when you're in the tent of your father. You know, it's not until the pressures start to mount and Laban has attempted murder of you and your family, has stolen all of your possessions, that you really have to wonder if, you will go and do the things which the Lord hath commanded you. And do you really believe that the Lord will provide a way to accomplish the thing which he has commanded you? Now that's where it got real. And there is a moment there where Nephi really he gives it to his brothers, this very, very powerful testimony that's not nearly as quoted as often as First Nephi 3:7. So there is this idea that, like, what does it mean for us to be fully mature, and why, in a psychological sense, does this have something to do with reconciling with our Father? So this moving from the messianic stage, you fully more integrate and mature when you start to see human beings as human beings. The black and white mindset that seems to be very prevalent in youth starts to kind of simmer away, and you've seen the grays, you understand the grays, and you're able to integrate a lot. A lot of people who leave the church, they remember their teachings when they were young and it's all black and white. Well, that's not always because the teachings are black and white, but that's how your brain is understanding things. It's not usually as well suited for understanding the nuance of things. And so this whole idea of the revelations that we have, in particular, the one I wanted to contextualize these comments towards are about the revelation on the extending the priesthood to all worthy men. And so you can see, obviously, I've got Matthew 7, and I'm not pulling the judge not card. If you listen to my one on judge not, I'm not one that usually pulls that out as a maneuver. as you see many do to just excuse their bad behavior. It's like, I did something bad, but hey, judge not, give me a free pass. What I actually wanted to emphasize is the verses that come after that. Why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Or how wilt thou say to thy brother, let me pull out the mote of thine own eye, and behold, a beam is in thine own eye? Now, before I go and start to cast stones at the people of the past or try to pluck perhaps a mote from their eye, I think it's worth considering the beam in thine own eye. Just like in this final step of maturation, before we start to overly criticize the sins of the past, the sins of our parents, consider perhaps there might be a beam in your own eye. And I don't know what I would do in the past, you know. I'm sure that many people today who come with this very, I'm going to call it a participation trophy level of glory, that I wouldn't have done those things if I was in the past. I would have been virtuous. I would have stood up to Hitler. I would have given my life. I wouldn't have become a Nazi. I wouldn't have held slaves. I would have been righteous and pure. I would have stood against the grain. Statistically speaking, that's probably not true. And before you go and claim some unearned righteous credit, you know, again, before you go and you criticize the world and the past world, perhaps look at your own life and see where maybe your faults are. And so this is the message that I wanted to share with, and that I am getting out of these official declarations and the revelation on the priesthood. Before I go and start railing on Brigham Young for things that he shouldn't have said, that are, I would say, with our modern eyes that have the revelations, the Christian eyes, and the glory that's been given to us today, are not true, are not accurate, are bad. They may even be evil and sinful. Before I start to try to throw him under the bus, you know, Brigham Young did things and made sacrifices that the average modern man would not be willing to make. And he did so many things that were incredible and admirable, that I would say, again, before we start to pluck at motes and disparage the individual, I think we should look at the beam in our own eyes. Now, we can take a moment and just look objectively and say, like, this thing that happened is not good. But again, before I put someone in the judgment seat, I would say maybe let's not put ourselves in the judgment seat of individuals. Whereas we can look at some of these practices and ideas, and you can go through the history and seek to understand them more thoroughly. But, you know, there's a difference between judging the person and judging the content, right? And we will look at many of the content that has come from people of our past, and that can be, you know, righteous people, people who have done incredible things, who are not even spiritual religious leaders, right? We have this same discussion happening with some of the founding fathers of Western society, who have done things that are not acceptable by today's standards. But before, again, we go any further, remember where these standards came from and how they got established and the sacrifices that were made. So before we again pluck out that mote, think about the beam that may be in our own eye. And so the message that I get from this is, what in the world is being withheld from me, and what in the world is being withheld from us today on account of my own sin, on account of my own ignorance, my own biases and prejudices. I'm not going down the whole rabbit hole of some of the unconscious bias. No, that's not what I'm talking about. But I think that you can say, like, cultural biases within the world that I have. Sometimes it is worth trying to utilize some energy to look outside of that. You know, especially when you look at the culture. You know, in Utah, in particular, we've got a Utah culture and an American culture, which are very, very opposite things in many ways. So going back to that question, I want to say it again for emphasis. What in the world could possibly being withheld from me on account of my sin? And before, if I don't know how constructive it is to take someone in the past and, put them through the mud. Perhaps it's better for us to just look at our own selves and see what we can do to more fully reconcile with God and receive all that God has offered to us. And here we go. Yet again, Doctrine and Covenants 1:11:11. We'll see if I get the quote right this time. I will order all things for your good as fast as you are able to receive them. So, what are we not receiving on account of our unwillingness to hold on to them? So, here are a few verses of scripture that go in line with this line of thinking, this Matthew 7. We have John 16, where Christ is chiding the apostles, and these are apostles. So these are apostles, the holy, 12 apostles appointed by Christ. And Christ says, look, hitherto you have asked nothing in my name. Ask, and ye shall receive, that your joy may be full. An incredible lesson given to the 12 apostles that, again, before we start plucking at motes, we should ask ourselves, are there things that I have yet to really ask? And not just in the passive, very faint, whimsical way, but like in a serious way, a fasting and full of intent way. Something for us to ponder for ourselves in an introspective manner. In like manner, I love this verse. This verse is one of the core ones that I'd like to go to in Alma chapter 12, just because of how powerful and direct the language is. It says, Alma began to expound these things unto him, saying, it is given unto many to know the mysteries of God. Nevertheless, they are laid under a strict command, that they shall not impart only according to the portion of his word which he doth grant unto the children of men, according to the heed and diligence which they give unto him. And therefore he that will harden his heart, whether they're members of the church or not, and perhaps is what we learned in that verse from John, maybe even an apostle, chosen and sent by God to perform a serious and an important mission, if they will harden the heart, the same will receive a lesser portion of the world. And he that will not harden his heart, to him is given the greater portion of the world, until it is given unto him to know the mysteries of God, until he know them in full. A strict command. There is a path that is laid before us. Now, who will take that path? That's up for us. So instead of, again, slinging mud at the people of the past, look at your own self and your own life and saying, what is being withheld from me on account of me not giving heed and diligence to what has already been given before me? This is not an intellectual game. This is a game of legitimate spirituality and righteousness. Are there things, sins that you're holding on to that you're not willing to forsake and bury and sacrifice? Again, I said, if it came to a battle of sacrifice, I would not want to stand in the arena with giants like Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, who I believe in every way were willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of the gospel. Now, again, they had their own flaws, but I revere so much of the wisdom and examples that have come from these individuals, and so before I, you know, take take a step back and say, look, they were wrong here. I think a better lesson for us as we go through this part of history is for us to ask ourselves, what may be in my eye blinding me today? All right, so let's keep going. Third Nephi, this a continuation of the same principles, a good cross reference here. Now the plates of Nephi do contain more the part of things which he, Jesus Christ, taught the people. And these things have I written, which are a lesser part of the things which Jesus taught the people. And I have written them to the intent that they may be brought again to this people from the Gentiles, according to the words which Jesus has spoken. And when they shall have received this, which is expedient that they should have first, to try their faith, And if it shall so be that they shall believe these things, then the greater things shall be manifest unto them. The greater things are not had to us yet. And whose fault is that? Don't go around blaming the people of the past. Look at your own self. Look at the mirror and see what could be withheld from me. And I believe that there are many individually great revelations that are not that are designed to say this is not had to the world yet, but maybe God will allow you to take a little peek beyond the veil and receive some great and miraculous things on account of your faith, on account of your righteousness, if you will be willing to give heed and diligence to the commands that God has given. In general, but I want to make this again as intimate and specific as possible, because God, if you asked him today and say, what do I need to be a better person? You're going to get a Jonah-like call into Nineveh, and you'll probably have a Jonah-like retreat into the belly of the whale, an avoidance of those things, because it's hard. It's hard to make those sacrifices. And there is a beam in our eyes. And imagine what we should learn from this whole statement here, this lesson of the revelation on the priesthood, is there are greater things out there. Yet, there are greater things out there for us if we will take them and receive them, if we will follow the Lord and what he desires to show us now. In like manner, we have again in 3rd Nephi this idea of, this is kind of an extension of what we read in John, that hitherto you've asked nothing. If you just ask. So it came to pass that the disciples were journeying and they get together, united in mighty prayer, and then God shows up to them and says, what do you want from me? What will ye that I shall give unto you? And he said, tell us the name of the church. And he says, why is it you guys have been fighting about this? Maybe if they would have asked earlier, they could have spared themselves some of the dispute, the disputing over that particular thing. What could be withheld from us today? And it's hard because us as a whole group, and we should address that as a group within our wards, the congregations, bishops and leaders, and those that have leadership roles should perhaps investigate this. But always it begins with us as the individual. The great existentialist thought, the teaching from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I'll see if I can move myself here. One man who stopped lying could bring down a tyranny. Now that's the words of a man who attempted his best to be honest about certain events in the past, and have made a significant change and impact on the culture in Russia at the time, and led to a significant downfall. Some of the truths that came out with the Communist Party. So makes us wonder if we just were fully honest and took one principle, truth and honesty and integrity, and said, I'm just going to do that. Well, who could stand? Who could truly stand on their own honesty? This section should really make us ponder. Now, in a more direct way, we can look at this principle of one principle. Now, I highlighted honesty, but let's highlight another principle here that's maybe a little bit more directly connected to the teachings and the ideas that are presented in the restoration of the priesthood to all individuals. There's been priesthood restrictions had among many, and it was quite shocking for the original 12 apostles to receive a revelation that didn't come to them. Maybe it came to them in some ways in the teachings of Christ, but it didn't fully realize until after Christ had gone, right? Not everything was revealed all at once. The line upon line, precept upon precept was a true thing, even for the apostles. And when Peter had this sheet that said, the Gentiles are not unclean, don't call that which God hath made clean to be unclean. A very, very stern and powerful, incredible revelation given to Peter there that we still haven't fully realized. You and I probably. We don't even realize what happened there that God was trying to tell Peter, and I believe we still don't fully realize what God had revealed to the prophet Spencer W. Kimball in that miraculous and incredible revelation. So take this quote, for example, and ask yourself, have you fully received this? It's a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses, to remember that the dullest, most uninteresting person you can talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all only in a nightmare. All day long, we are in some degree helping each other to one or the other of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with the awe and circumspection proper to them that we should conduct all our dealings with one another, all friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal. Their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals to whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. How are you treating the everyday man, the common man, the base man? How do you treat other people? Do you see them as children of God? Now, if everyone could just truly give heed and diligence to that principle, imagine what revelations could follow. If we could just see the everyday person, the neighbor around us, as a child of God and fully realize what that means. Now, Spencer W. Kimball looked beyond the veil and saw something there that should give us pause, because all individuals are created in the image of God. We are all children of God. And we should take a moment as we read from this section and review some of the history, our own lives, and say, what is being withheld from me on account of my own sin, on account of my own cowardness, on account of my own prejudices and biases, my fears, my own blindness, unwillingness to see, unwillingness to follow God. So I'll close with this, a great challenge offered in the Old Testament. It makes me think of the sword and the stone. Is there a man worthy to pull that out? What would happen if there was a worthy man? What happens if there was a worthy, and I'm not saying this to, like, again, disparage us today. I want this to be a encouragement for us to rise up and take hold of the things that are before us. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show himself strong in behalf of them whose heart is perfect towards him. There are many great things out there, and perhaps we in this telestial state, there are terrestrial things beyond our reach that aren't quite as beyond, like, if that we could get, and celestial things that are just awaiting us, waiting for us to just be ready to come to God, to make those sacrifices. So I hope that these things are helpful to you. This will give me a week of introspection, and I hope that maybe as you go through the history and you read some of these revelations and you think on these things, that you might have a meaningful, revelatory, introspective moment that could help transform your life in equal proportion to the magnitude of this amazing divine revelation that was given to the prophet Spencer W. Kimball for us and the church at whole. So God be with you. Till next time. Bye.